I'm Kathleen Liebeck, and I'm here today with the New Mexico State Bar's Senior Lawyer Division Oral History Project. And I'm here to interview Mr. Richard Civerolo, whom I've known for 30 years. And we're going to start this morning with your early life. You were born in 1917, Gallup, New Mexico, right?
Correct.
And tell us a little bit about your early life.
Well, my father came over from Italy around the turn of the century, Kathleen, and he came to Gallup to work in the mines. It's my understanding that he was in the service, and there was several Italian gentlemen that didn't want to go to Africa where they were being sent at that time, so they came over, and some of them went to Raton, some of them to Trinidad, and he, with several of them, came to Gallup and sent for my mother several years later. So she came over with a son and a daughter. They settled in Gallup, and he worked in the coal mines until his death in the early 30s. During my youth, of course, in those days we didn't have all of the facilities and things that we have now. I recall that we had a coal stove. There wasn't any gas available at that time. As a matter of fact, we even had a outside oven where we made where my mother baked breads, and it was my responsibility as the youngest one to see that it was stoked properly.
How many brothers and sisters did you have?
Yes, in one of those old-fashioned ovens. And as a matter of fact, we had an outdoor water bathroom because we didn't have a bathroom until later on. But my mother preferred the coal stove, and even when we were able to get gas stoves or gas into the house, she wasn't very happy about it. She wanted a good old go. So, but we lived a pretty routine life. We never had an automobile. Of course, in those days, shopping and grocery stores were pretty convenient. We could walk to it. But also, I remember buying a loaf of bread for 10 cents. Now you can't hardly buy anything for 10 cents. We had our own vegetable garden. We had chickens and rabbits that we raised, and I recall delivering newspapers from an early age. I would walk to the railroad station early in the morning and pick up the newspapers, and during the winter, and winters can be severe in Gallup. I recall standing by the old locomotives and the steam to warm up before I took off delivering my newspapers. I graduated from high school. As a matter of fact, I was active in sports, and I began working at the Charles Elfeld Company for 5 days a week for $15 a week. And
what was your job?
Actually, it wasn't a bad salary in those days.
What was your job?
I was loading trucks in the morning, and they had an ice plant. I would cut the 300-pound pieces of ice into 50s or 25s or 70s, whatever they wanted. And then I worked in the hardware department, and I recall very vividly in those days assembling wagons for the Navajos. We'd put them together. They'd come in all disassembled, and we'd put them together. I remember mixing paint. Of course, nowadays lead, but in those days you had a gallon of lead and a gallon of paint, and you mix your own paint. I also remember handling barbed wire. We sold a lot of barbed wire, and you had to be sort of experienced at handling that barbed wire because it could be very difficult in lifting them and carrying them. And I always wanted to progress because I realized that in Gallup there wouldn't be a great deal of future. The only type of jobs were available were either with Charles Elfeld Company or Gallup Merck or the railroad or the highway department, something of this sort. And my brothers worked for the highway and also for the railroad. And when I was in Santa Fe, New Mexico, visiting a friend when Pearl Harbor happened, and I realized that there may come a time when I probably would have to either enlist or they would induct me. Right after Pearl Harbor, there was a move on to get the young people in Gallup and elsewhere in New Mexico to volunteer for the National Guard to go over to Bataan. And I remember very specifically that everybody thought it was great and quite a challenge, but I was at the age that required my mother's signature, and she refused to sign. Unfortunately, most of the Bataan veterans that came out of New Mexico didn't make it. But when we became involved in World War II in Germany, I volunteered. And I recall going to Santa Fe and being inducted up there in Santa Fe. And in the next week, I was shipped off to El Paso, and I started my Army career. I quickly realized that I would much rather be an officer than an enlisted man, so I took some intelligence tests, and apparently I made a fairly good score because they classified me as being officer candidate material. So I went to officer candidate school for 6 months, and when I graduated, I was a second lieutenant. I was sent to Camp Robinson in Arkansas, and I was a platoon officer, and then I became an assistant battalion adjutant. And that's when I met my wife. She was a secretary in headquarters, and our regiment decided to have a sort of a dance and affair to introduce the officers to the camp. And my company commander was the only one that had a car, so he was recruited to try to enlist or get some young ladies that might want to come to our dance. So one weekend, he and I got the names of all of the young ladies in the headquarters, thinking that was probably the easiest way to find someone because we didn't know anybody. And I recall Mary's father was a regular Army man, and he was stationed out of Washington, D.C., and we went to her home on one Saturday morning to see if she would be interested in attending our dance. And I recall very well, she was a very attractive young lady, and she came to the door and had shorts on and looked very attractive. So I remember telling Captain Bradley, "Captain, I don't know about you, but that one's mine." And it was a very prophetic utterance, you know. But after we were sent to England, and I was an assistant adjutant there in a camp just outside of Liverpool, I made friends with some of the Liverpool officers, some of the English officers and some of the camp people nearby. And I recall specifically that being so close to Liverpool, they had a great opera house, a great opera, and I enlisted, I bought a membership, and I would go in, and I met some nice people. And from there, we shipped overseas. We hit Omaha Beach, not on D-Day, but shortly thereafter. And I remember specifically going down the ropes, getting into the water, and walking to the beach. And the first thing I recall was at the top of the cliffs on Omaha Beach, the engineers had built a huge sign. The Germans had set what they call bouncing betties, booby traps. And if you'd walk by within a couple of yards, it would activate them, and they would jump. They would spring up about waist high and cause a lot of damage. So they had this huge sign, it was a billboard size, saying, if you get out of this path, you'll get a bouncing Betty up your... And that was very effective in keeping everybody within the path. As far as being a soldier was concerned, I didn't do anything extraordinary. I just I got my own command, and I was a company commander. Then I was a battalion adjutant. I remember General Patton coming onto the beaches. If you've seen the movie General Patton, perhaps you recall the scene where he was talking to all the troops. Well, I was there. And he was a two-star general at that time. And sure enough, he comes wheeling up in his Jeep with his dog and his pistols. And he gets on this platform with a megaphone. And the first thing he said was, I expect every one of you SOBs to get killed. And I turned around to the major next to me and I said, I don't know about you, but he's not talking about me. And you know, those are the kind of things that you remember. You have one of my pictures in the book that I've given you of me on the banks of the Rhine River in Alsace-Lorraine in the wintertime, where it was kind of cold. We just did what we had to do, nothing spectacular. I remember St. Lo. If you've seen the recent movies that they've been running of the war and all, it shows all of the airplanes when they bombarded St. Lo. It was an unbelievable sight. And I remember it very, very, very well because it was something that one can't forget. Just according to statistics and what they were telling us, that was the largest bombardment during the war ever. There were just hundreds and hundreds of bombers coming over and all. And what really struck me is that they had markers. They would drop smoke signals or smoke bombs to delineate the lines between the Germans and the Americans. And the wind shifted, and some of the bombs fell on some of our own troops. And even that was chronicled in the newspapers and everything else. But after that bombardment, it was just unbelievable. Patton's and tanks were then on the scene, and the landscape in that area was pretty level. There were a lot of grapevines and all up. I'm sure you've been to France, you know how those are. But the French were they had their own troops and all, of course, and what rather interested me is to see tanks along the road, rolling down the road with young ladies in them, heads sticking up the turns, you know, and chicken in cages in the back of the truck of the tank. They know how to travel. I remember Dachau. I wasn't among the troops that took Dachau, but I remember going there shortly thereafter, and I have a photograph that I took myself of the ovens that I have here, and it was something that we just couldn't understand. And now, with all of the talk about, never even happened, just a matter of imagination, I assure you that it was not a matter of imagination, and it's unbelievable. As a matter of fact, for some reason or other, I picked up a little urn that they would put the ashes in a cremated bin. And I had it in my knapsack, and when we were discharged, I just threw it in my trunk because we had a footlocker. And after I got home, well, there are things I just couldn't forget, and I had a hard time sleeping. And one night I got up, picked up that little urn, and walked out in the street and slammed it on the curb and broke it. And after that, I could sleep well. Just those things that stick with you. I remember Birch's Garden, beautiful view. I remember there were some nice things that happened. I remember going through Reims and picking up a truckload of good champagne. And I bought it, I didn't steal it. And I was, my headquarters was a nice place for lawyers, for the officers to meet, because I always had some champagne. It lasted a couple of months. But it also made a deal with the English, because I'd been involved in the Red Ball Express. And they gave me a voucher for every officer that I had in my battalion, and I would send them back to Caen once every month for one bottle of scotch and half a bottle of gin, or vice versa either. So I was always well equipped to take care of my troops, as well as my colonel would go hundreds of yards or miles just to come and have supper with me sometime. But you learn how to take care of yourself, because if you didn't, and I have a sign on my desk there, Captain Rich C. Civerolo commanding. That was made by a German prisoner who was my jeep driver. And I kept it, and I have it there as a kind of memento. As a matter of fact, I was going through some of my things at home to sort of prepare for this, and I found my old bayonet. I had a German Luger that I had picked up from an officer, a German officer, and matter of fact, Bob Curtis has it now. He's going to clean it up for me. And I still have my old helmet. It's amazing how you just put these things away, and then suddenly they bring back memories. I got hurt during the war. It was not a war injury. And as a matter of fact, I don't know how it happened, but when I was discharged, they determined that I had a traumatic cataract in my left eye. And that I lived with that very severe cataract for years. I went to school with it and practiced law for a while until I found someone who could remove it and replace it with a lens. Matter of fact, they classified me as disabled, so I became involved in Veterans Affairs, and that's why I was commander of the state commander of the Disabled American Veterans. I thought maybe that I would be able to do something for some of these veterans. But I've been gone for a couple of years, and Mary and I had gotten engaged before I left. When I came back, I took a troop train from New York to Gallup, through El Paso to Gallup, and her father was a regular Army officer stationed in Camp Commander in Utah, and she came from Utah down to Gallup. I got to Gallup one Friday. We got married Saturday morning, and I started the school next week. We got married on the 10th day of November, which will be 62
tomorrow.
Years tomorrow.
Tomorrow's Saturday, too.
Right. And I didn't have an automobile, but one of my young friends had an automobile, so he drove us to Albuquerque, because I determined, I better get an education. The Army, if nothing else, it certainly made me prove myself that I could do something, because I found out that I could lecture to troops, I could command troops. As a matter of fact, I have a letter in one of my files where the Inspector General said my company was one of the best companies he ever inspected, and they made me an offer to stay in as a regular Army officer, but that I decided that I needed to get out and do something. So I came to Albuquerque and enlisted or enrolled in the University of New Mexico on I think it was the 12th or 13th of November in 1945. We didn't have a place to live, but my brother was living here in Albuquerque, and he was working for the State Highway Department as a chief clerk. So he had a basement apartment. So we stayed in a basement apartment until we were able to find a place. In those days, it was very difficult to find any living houses or rentals. We found a little place down on South Broadway, believe it or not, and we stayed there for quite a while. And I enlisted when I enrolled in college, I enrolled under the GI Bill, and I was getting $90 a month. Mary went to work so that we could live adequately. And I immediately began involved in matters at the university. I decided that not only did I want an education, but I realized that you got to get involved in things if you want to make your presence and also reputation, whatnot. I know I've been asked, well, why did you why did you want to be a lawyer? Well, it's rather interesting how I became a lawyer. I always wanted to. I admired I had a lawyer friend in Gallup. He and I were involved in little theater over there, and I became acquainted with him and his wife, and he lived a pretty good life, and I thought, this is not bad. And then my mother rather, had a doctor whom I really admired. I thought he was a great guy, and I thought it might not be bad to be a doctor. But I wanted to go. I had lost my father by then, so I wanted to go. Thought it would be nice to go back to Italy and maybe go to school there. I contacted the Italian consular in Denver, and he cautioned me not to go back to Italy because my father had been in the service, and the moment I hit the Italian soil, he said they'd conscript me in the service. So he warned me not to go. So that discouraged me from wanting to be a doctor. When I enrolled in the University of New Mexico, and by the way, it was late in the semester because it was mid-November, they opened the law school in 1947, and it suddenly occurred to me that, gee, maybe I ought to get a profession, because I really didn't know what I wanted to do. And I was working while I was going to school, by the way. I was working in the summertime from the State Highway Department. Matter of fact, I helped lay the asphalt on Monroe Boulevard, as an example. And I was also part-time with Charles Ethel Company, who had a warehouse here in town. And we didn't have a automobile, so Mary and I generally walked. I decided that I would try to get in, see if I could enroll in law school. So I went over and checked with the dean, and I worked out a deal with him where I could earn both degrees. I would work on my BA during the summertime and go to law school during the fall and spring. So I did, but I also worked. When I was going to law school, I remember that Joe Woods and I, who later became a Court of Appeal judge, were quite good friends, and he had a car and I didn't. He used to drive me to school and back all the time. We went to work for Professor Polivard, who was the librarian. We're making $1.10 an hour. And the first law class was in the old stadium. There was one classroom in the library and the administrative offices. Whenever there was a football game or anything of any activity on the stadium, of course, class was dismissed because it would be impossible. It was impossible to do any work or anything. I recall that our first class, they were practically all veterans. We had one young lady, Raquel Marcus. She did not graduate, but I think you have some photographs. I was able to, I become acquainted with the new dean of the law school, and I was visiting her the one day, and I don't think they had any of much material about the first law class. I had some alumni albums at home, so I dug some of them up and found some photographs of the first class, some photographs of the graduating class, some information about the professors and the students and all, and I made them available to her, and also they're in this book that I prepared.
The current dean.
Pardon?
You've given those to the current dean.
Yes, they're in there. Yes, ma'am. I became involved in political activities and other activities on campus. I joined a fraternity. I became involved in the Student Senate. I organized the Veterans Association. And by the way, the second class, after of course, when they needed additional classrooms, so we were able to work with the people out of Kirtland and had a barrack moved down for the second year class after we graduated from the first year class. Actually, we graduated from that barrack when I got my. Then it was LLBs rather than JD. It became a JD later. But I found out that when I went to when graduation time came, that I lacked 3 hours of some basic class for my BA. So I had to arrange with the dean to transfer 3 hours of my criminal law, which over so I could get both degrees. And I got 2 degrees the same night. I'm not sure they do that anymore. I don't know.
Did anyone else in your class get 2 degrees?
And I know that...
Did anyone else in your class get 2 degrees?
No, I was the only one. I was the only one. And I worked part-time, too. When I was going to law school, I was fortunate in working for Bill O'Sullivan as sort of a clerk.
He's
and I became
attorney.
Acquainted with him and with Joe Smith. And it was some of the best. I learned how to, law school taught me the law. They taught me how to be a lawyer, which is a significant difference. And they not only became friends, but when I got to the point where I decided I wanted to practice myself after I graduated, I went around some of the big firms in town to check to see if they needed a young lawyer. I remember going to the Rhodey firm, I remember going to a modular firm, and in those days it was Johnson's firm too. Then I decided, let me see if I can make it on my own. If I can't, I don't have to go to work for somebody. So I talked to Gino Matucci, and he had an office in the old First National Bank building on the second floor. And Gino let me share offices with him. And I did my own typing. As a matter of fact, I still have my Underwood typewriter under my desk, or back in my office. I have my first chair I bought. I bought a chair for $5 from a used furniture store downtown and carried it to my office myself. I have it home in my study at home, which is the best chair I still have, but it's an old, solid chair. Let me tell you about the bar exam. I understand that I was the first student that took this bar exam. Of course, we were the first ones to take it here in New Mexico because we were the first class. But one of my professors, Professor Weihoffen, who was a contract and one heck of a professor, but very, very strict and very particular. He called me in when he found that we were going to take the state bar, and he said, "You know, Civerolo, can you type?" I said, "Yeah, I'm a pretty good typist." Why? He said, "Well, I think you could have raised your grade at least 1 point if I could read your writing. So if you can possibly arrange to use the typewriter to take your state bar, you might be better off." Well, through my activities with disabled American veterans in New Mexico, one of the fellow members was the state treasurer. His wife was the secretary for Judge McGee on the Supreme Court. So one day I was visiting with Bob, and I said, and I was discussing this with him. He said, "Why don't you talk to my wife and have her talk to the judge?" Thought, that's a great idea. So I pursued it, and sure enough, Judge McGee talked to Lowell Green, who was then the chief clerk, and arranged for me to take my typewriter to Santa Fe, and they put me on by myself in the library. So I typed my bar exam. And what I recall specifically about it is that every half hour, Lowell will come look over my shoulder, be sure I wasn't cheating, and I finally told him, "Lowell, you know, you're kind of bothering me. How in the heck would I cheat? Frankly, I don't know what the hell I'm doing, and I certainly can't go and visit with any of these books in this library because I wouldn't know what to look for and wouldn't do me any good anyway." But I passed. In those days, you took your exam one day, they graded it, and you knew the next morning they posted those who passed on the Supreme Court chambers, and then we were sworn in. I recall that 2 days after I got sworn in, I tried a case for Gino. And the rules were pretty fresh in my mind. As a matter of fact, my opponent was a member of the Rody firm, and the issue involved a miner who was working for a mine, and the issue was whether he wasn't getting any salary, so Gino sued for him, and I was trying it for him. Well, during the trial, the lawyer contended that he wasn't entitled to the salary because he was a partner. So I haven't remembered the rules. I got up and moved that the complaint be amended to claim a partnership interest in the mine. And sure enough, we got a partnership interest in the mine. That was my first case and my first time I tried it. Well, it's rather interesting how I got involved in doing trial work and insurance work, Kathleen. Bill O'Sullivan was a great criminal lawyer. And matter of fact, he and Joe Smith were probably the first real plaintiffs' lawyers around. They started that doing negligence work. And I remember the Kelleher firm had an office in the First National Bank building too. And I recall when I was working for Bill O'Sullivan that one day he dumped an abstract on my desk and says, "Give me an opinion." I didn't even know what he was talking about. But fortunately, I made friends with Will Kelleher's secretary, and I was chatting with her, and she said, "Well, you know, we do a lot of that work. Tell me what you need, and I'm sure we got a written opinion." So there was another source of friendship that I have, and it was my first introduction to title work. I didn't like criminal work because the feeling I had that I could tell whether they were lying to me or not. And although I realize that being a lawyer, that the idea is that they have rights, but when they were just outright lying to me, I just didn't feel as though I could exercise the necessary effort to try to protect them. So I stopped doing criminal work. I tried a case for Gino involving an automobile accident, and I won. Next day, the insurance company came by and hired me. That's how I got started doing insurance work. I remember I did my own typing for a couple of years, and I recall Judge Rogers, district court judge who later became federal judge. He called me in one day and he said, "Civerolo does your typing for you." I said, "Well, I do all my own typing. I don't have a secretary." He said, "Well, I suggest you get one part-time because your typing isn't very good." So Gino let me borrow one of his secretaries part-time. That's how I got started. But suddenly I found that I liked trial work. And it was challenging. It was interesting. You had to exercise judgment. It wasn't easy. It wasn't very much pay, but I liked trial work. So I got involved in doing trial work, and pretty soon it began. The more cases you tried, the more cases you won, why, the more insurance companies that came by and knocked on your door. But in the meantime, Kathleen, I decided that it was easy for me to get involved in other things too. I became involved in constant social agencies, the forerunner to the United Fund, and I was president of it. I was involved in the Veteran Affairs. I was on the Veterans Service Commission. I incorporated the Legal Aid Society. I have the documents in my office. I got interested in the Cancer Society. In those days, they didn't have the beautiful building they have now. Matter of fact, where they are now was the old Bernalillo County Indian Hospital. They made arrangements. Somehow or other, they got involved in trying to get a cancer clinic. I was with the Cancer Society for 45 years. I was a lawyer. I was on the national board. I would go back to New York. I helped write the national bylaws. I volunteered my time. I remember carrying a typewriter into the office at the old Bernalillo County Indian Hospital. It was the first tumor registry in New Mexico, other than a Veterans Hospital. The only one they had here. And then a couple years later, when I was state president of the Cancer Society, I got them a $37,000 grant from the National and bought them one of the first electronic microscopes that for the cancer clinic. Matter of fact, someplace in my file I have a photograph that was taken of me by this monster, and I got a lot of publicity out of it, and so did the Cancer Society. I didn't much care about myself, but I got involved in all those things, and not only were they personally satisfying to me, but I became acquainted with a lot of people that helped me broaden my my law practice. As a matter of fact, you remember Wayne Wolf. He and I were involved when the developers from New York came here and tied up all that land at Rio Rancho that later became Rio Rancho. In those days, it was nothing but prairie dogs and sagebrush.
Well, that was when Wayne and Leroy became
Yes,
your
yes,
with
ma'am.
your firm.
And
Leroy Hansen.
yeah, and then Leroy and I were involved representing the city in the first television company that came to town. We helped with the agreement with them.
When did Wayne and Leroy join the firm?
Pardon?
Wayne and Leroy, when was
I
that
don't,
about?
the specific date I don't recall, but I
60s?
remember this is the first time that cable television came to town and needed a franchise. And we were doing some work for the city, and Leroy and I, and Leroy worked on it primarily, but both of us worked on it. And those are some of the things that we were involved in. But I've got a list of things in my resume there that I've given you that it shows how involved I was. I also participated in bar affairs. I helped start the Lawyers Club. I was president of the Albuquerque Lawyers Club. I was a charter member of the Albuquerque Bar Association.
You spent a lot of time with the Medical Review Commission.
Well, that was later on when in the plus all of the other committees that I worked on quite a few of them. Matter of fact, one committee I worked on specifically that I'm going to mention later on had to do with lawyer advertising and all. In those days, of course, that was before the famous Arizona case, Supreme Court, that said, lawyers can advertise. I was chair of that committee, and we were trying to see if we couldn't define some limits for lawyers' advertisements. I got a nasty letter from the Yellow Page people saying, "We're going to sue you because you're violating lawyers' rights." They have First Amendment right to do what they want. We want their advertisement. It's important to us, and if you try to restrict their advertisement, we're going to sue you. I resigned from the committee. I said, I don't want to do this. By the way, that's one of the things I'm going to mention later on if you ask me about some of the things I like and dislike about the practice of law now. I've enjoyed all of these efforts, and not only has it really enriched me personally, but I think it's helped establish a reputation.
You were national president of ABOTA, weren't you?
Yes, and it also helped me professionally. It's helped me. I had some clients that were in the real estate business, and in those days it was so easy to get involved with them as far as investments were concerned. And through my relationship with some of these organizations, when a neighbor of mine started the Western Bank, came to me to help him. I helped put that together, helped me get their charter. And later on, it's been one of the best investments I've ever made. In addition, I was on the board of directors and general counsel in 1973 until 2000 when they sold to Compass Bank. It was a great introduction to business. I conducted every corporate meeting, stakeholder meetings the bank had except one, and I was ill at that time. So it was. It also helped me in business. The Bell company right now. Saul Bell came to me in the early 60s. And I incorporated him with his company. I held a share of stock. And now, of course, he's got about 400 employees, and I think they've got an $80 million a year business. I helped them get started. I wrote all of their bylaws, and I represented them for years. Of course, I'm not involved in that kind of business anymore. But and it's through simple relationships. I remember the way I met. A lot of these things that happen. It's you got to be you got to be a little bit lucky. You got to be at the right spot at the right time. And honestly, many of the quote achievements I might have made or contacts I had were being at the right spot at the right time. In those days, it was easier to get started without a bunch of cash than it is now. But I also, business-wise, I learned real quickly that credit was important. So I went down to the Albuquerque National Bank, which was down on the corner of 2nd Street in Central, and borrowed money, kept it for a month, didn't spend it, paid off my debt, used the same money, and created credit. And later on, it was very important in my getting started in my business when I needed to do that. But that's one of these things you learn when you grow up in a family like I did, because what we had, we earned ourselves, and we made it. We were happy and didn't realize it wasn't the idea of buying it because you wanted it. We bought it because we needed it. That's what I've been trying to teach all of my kids and friends is don't buy it just because you want it. Buy it if you need it, because you're better off if you do. Fortunately, over the years, I've had some great associates. I've had some intelligent associates. We've had some great staff. I recall specifically Gino and I talking Peter Domenici to getting involved in politics, and we helped finance to get started, which I think is probably one of the greatest things that a politician could have done for New Mexico, for all that he's done for them. And his son Pete was with us for a while. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's take a break.
Okay. Good. Let's take a break. Okay.
Kathleen, you've asked me about some of the activities I participated in the Bar Association. I referred to my resume, and I noticed that I'm just going to comment because it's easier from here. I served as chairman of the New Mexico State Bar and Authorized Practice of Law Committee from 69 to 77. I was a member of the New Mexico State Bar Grievance and Ethics Committee from 78 to 81. I have been chairman of the New Mexico Medical Legal Grievance Committee since 1984 and still am. I've been chairman of the New Mexico Medical Review Committee since 1983 to the present. I've been chairman of the New Mexico Medical Liaison Committee since 1983, and I'll comment about those a little later because I think that this is something that has been worthwhile for not only for the State Bar but for the Medical Society and also for the courts later on.
What exactly did you do in those liaison positions? And
the Liaison Committee was established as a sort of a hearing board between the Medical Society and the State Bar. We met quite frequently in discussing issues such as, rather than being controversial and arguing with one another, especially with the type of legislation and the Medical Malpractice Act. We would meet and discuss those things. As a matter of fact, I have a nice letter from Steve Durkovich, who is a rather well-known plaintiff's lawyer, setting out some of the things that the liaison committee has done and how it's been a forum for, rather than fighting in court, we meet, and I've been chairman of it since '84, and resolve a lot of the issues rather than be controversial, and equal number of plaintiffs' lawyers, defense lawyers, and physicians on it, and it's worked out rather well. Rather than we don't do any lobbying at all. We're not permitted to, and we would want to do it anyway. Of course, the plaintiffs' bar has a lobbyist, and they have their own interests. But this liaison committee has been able to alleviate all of these problems rather than coming out in public or before the legislature. We've talked about the individual problems as an example. There was an issue a couple of years ago about the cost of insurance and the limit as far as recovery is concerned. I arranged to have the president of the insurance company come into town and visit with us and set out what they're doing and what the risks are involved and the different risks as far as the different professions is concerned, and that's the kind of things that we do. We don't meet every year. We only meet when it's necessary. The other committees were set up for circumstances such as when a lawyer complains about a doctor, or a doctor complains about a lawyer. If they'll file a formal complaint, comes to me, I look at it. If I can't resolve it, then we have a committee meeting. And we've been able to really, if you just think that in the past 10 or 15 years, there haven't been very many controversial issues between the physicians and the lawyers and the courts, because frankly, some of these committees have been able to resolve these things. And the most important committee, however, is the Medical Review Committee. That was that's a statutory provision that requires, before a lawsuit can be filed in court against a medical practitioner who is qualified under the Act, and I want to accent that because they have to qualify under the Act, they must submit the petition before the Medical Review Committee. And the statute provides that 3 lawyers and 3 physicians serve on this committee. The State Bar has always cooperated. As a matter of fact, some of us helped write this Medical Malpractice Act, so we realized the involvement of the State Bar. In 2006, this committee had 250 volunteers, which is the largest committee in the state, numerically anyway, in the State Bar. But what it does is that it, whenever a petition is filed, there's a specific procedure and a policy that we prepared that they must follow and send all of their records and all to this panel who review who have a hearing. And they then vote as to whether or not there's probable cause and whether or not there's injury. I'm just paraphrasing. And actually, statistically, and this, I have a document here that I prepared in 2006 when this committee received the award from the New Mexico State Bar as the Outstanding Section Committee Award. Uh, I went back and looked at my records and prepared some statistics as far as the type of work that lawyers are working and the doctors, because there's three of each. And I was able to find that since the inception of these Medical Review Commission by statute, and this was in 206, since then there have been others, there have been 3,180 panel hearings. But when you break that down, the 3 lawyers and 3 doctors, and they look at the material, they travel to the panel hearing, and they spend 4 to 5 hours on each. That relates to 9,540 attorneys and doctors who have volunteered over those years, because you need 6 for each panel hearing. And that's between 38,000 and 47,000 hours of their time that they devoted. But the significant number of cases that have been resolved without lawsuit and without the involvement of the judge and the jury and the judicial system have been extremely significant. As a matter of fact, we're one of the very few states that has a medical malpractice act. And I've gotten the correspondence and comments from different states. As a matter of fact, just a year or so ago, I had a judge in Texas contact me and wanting to discuss with me and get copies of what we've done and all, because apparently they were thinking about doing something similar. But it has functioned quite well, because it lets the plaintiff's lawyer, among other things, find out whether he's got a case or not. And then it also has the medical practitioner know whether he's got a problem or not. And it's amazing the number of cases that are either dropped or settled because of this process. And it has smoothed the relationship between the medical profession, the legal profession, and certainly not overburdened the courts. And I hadn't really looked at all of the efforts that they had put out, and that's a significant number of hours and significant number of lawyers and doctors involved. My function has been these volunteers, they submit when the case is filed, the staff that's set up by the Medical Society, they are on contract with the chairman of the Medical Review Commission, who's appointed by the Supreme Court. They review these petitions, and then they send out a card to those volunteers to see who would volunteer to serve on any one particular panel. And then they follow up, and after they get a certain number of names, they submit them to me to select 6. And the reason we select 6 is although only 3 serve, because the parties have the right to disqualify, or some of them have conflicts and can't show up. And this is true also of the doctors. What is rather interesting, and what I've been trying to resolve and haven't been able to, as far as the lawyers are concerned, is that the doctors get $50 for each hearing, plus they get some credit to their CLE. I've been trying for the last several years to see if perhaps the lawyers who spend all this time and effort might be able to get some pro bono hours. So far, I haven't been able to convince the State Bar that maybe they're entitled to something like this. But to me, and I've given you a copy of what I did, is being unable to correspond with each member of this committee over the years, I took it upon myself to publish a letter in the State Bar Bulletin telling them what they had done and thanking them as far as I was concerned, as far as the State Bar was concerned, and point out to them all the work and the hours that they've spent. And to me, that's one of the accomplishments as far as I'm concerned, because I've spent a few hours at this too over the years. And the policies and all that are in effect, I help prepare them. As a matter of fact, one of the first set of policies that were prepared, Jim Parker, who is now a federal judge, was a practicing lawyer, and so was Gene Franchini. They were on my committee, and that's some of the things that we've done. But this, to me, has been one of the better things that I've accomplished as far as being a lawyer is concerned. As a matter of fact, several years ago, the state bar awarded me a special award for the type of work that I've done. To my knowledge, it's the only award that any medical society has ever given to a lawyer.
You mean the medical society gave you the award?
The medical society gave it to me. Yes, I mentioned it in here. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but to me, this has not only been worthwhile to the state bar, but it's been worthwhile to the medical society, and certainly to the citizens of the state of New Mexico and the judiciary, because it's not only had a tremendous effect financially, but also it's stopped from overburdening the court system.
Right.
And it's worked rather well.
And it was an early form of alternative dispute resolution.
Yes.
Yeah. You want to take, when we start on here, do you want to talk about a boat a little bit and then the cases?
Okay.
Okay. All right. Now, wait until. Are we ready? Okay. We're back on the camera. So you were going to tell us a little bit about your involvement with the BOTA, the American Board of Trial Advocates.
Kathy, in addition to being involved in matters with the State Bar of New Mexico, I belong to several national organizations, such as the American College of Trial Lawyers, and that's an organization of trial lawyers. Only 2% of trial lawyers in the country belong. I've belonged for a number of years. As a matter of fact, I was state chairman at one time. But in addition, I got involved early in an organization called American Board of Trial Advocates that is an organization that, rather than being either plaintiff or defendant, it includes both. But in order to qualify, you have to have X number of jury trials to a conclusion. And I got involved in that through some cases I had with lawyers from California, because that's where it really got started. And I became interested because of some of the things they stood for. They stand for jury trials. The Seventh Amendment requires jury trial, which is now being disregarded by a lot of people. And in order to qualify, an associate is 20 trial lawyers, 20 trial to a conclusion, and then 50 is the next rank, and a diplomat is 100. I have 100. I've been a diplomat for a number of years. And by the way, at one time, it didn't take $1 million and 6 months to get ready for a trial. It just wasn't done that way, and I can relate to that later on when we visit here. But I became interested in many of the projects that they were doing, and after working with them on a number of the committees, I became national president. And I assure you that some of the finer plaintiffs and defense lawyers in the country belong to this organization, because they have established what they call a circle of I've forgotten the type of circle, but it has a prestige in that they meet with Congress once a year, and they go back to the Judiciary Department and discuss all these problems the lawyers have and all. And in the Inns of Court, matter of fact, I was at a meeting back in Washington, D.C., when the American Board of Trial Advocate contributed $10,000 to the Inns of Court to get started. The local Inns of Court, I was instrumental in getting that started.
What do they do?
here.
Tell us about what they do.
Well, they try to get law students, lawyers, and judges together and discuss types of problems that they have. And it's sort of a forum, and they generally have a meeting with the principal speaker, and they discuss subject and topics. It's been very interesting and very educational too. I have not been active in it. I was instrumental in getting it started here, but I think it's still functioning, and I know that nationally it's quite worthwhile. One of the things that the American Board of Health Advocate has undertaken recently that has gotten a lot of publicity is mock juries. As a matter of fact, we here in Albuquerque and in New Mexico, interestingly enough, when we started a boat in New Mexico, Jim Toulouse and I were the first two members. And I volunteered to treasure, and I'm still treasurer today. We sponsored the mock jury trial at the University of New Mexico, and all of since the team here was rather the winning team here, we had them all at a dinner party and gave them an award just to recognize them. We're now trying to get involved, and they're going to have a district team competition here in Albuquerque in January or February, and we're trying to get some of the board members and others to volunteer as judges. And it's a good accomplishment for students, and also teaches them somehow what lawyering is about, and also good for the judges and the attorneys who volunteer to assist them in training for the mock jury trial. That's just one of the things we do. But it was indeed a pleasure being national president of it, because I try to visit every chapter in the state, in the nation, and I found out that it was almost impossible to do. But they have excellent CLEs.
Continuing legal education?
Yes. And in addition, they pick beautiful places to go.
Oh, that's good.
As a matter of fact, I recall going to England, going to the Inns of Court, meeting with the judiciary or so-called judges in London, going to Ireland, and at that time the ambassador to Ireland was a member of a board from San Francisco, so we were all guests of the ambassador. I recall going to Hong Kong, where we met with the British bar there before the Chinese took over. We toured China with members of the bar. Last year they had a meeting in Florence, and the year before, or maybe last year, rather than 2 years ago, they met in Florence. Last year they had a meeting in some place in Africa. You know, they go to wonderful places, and as a member, I've been able to do a lot of traveling I wouldn't have done otherwise, among other things. But I've met some wonderful, wonderful people, and really, you know, basically, lawyers are pretty good people, honestly. They may be controversial, but still they like one another and they get along. That to me has been one of my favorite organizations, because of the friends that I've made and the things that I've been able to assist on, not necessarily accomplish, but assist with. You know, in the state bar has awarded me with the Distinguished Bar Service in recognition of the long-term commitment to the bar services and significant contributions to the legal profession. But in addition, I've gotten my first one in '69, but since then I've gotten one 71, 86, and 97. So I've gotten 4 of those. In 1976, I got a special award for outstanding work in improving the status and image of the legal profession and the administration of justice. You know, it's surprising how people remember things, Kathleen. When the firm published in the Bar Bulletin that I'd been practicing 57 years, I was surprised at the number of people who wrote me, and quite a number of judges. And every one of them had nice things to say, which made me feel good. I've got some of them here. I don't necessarily think they belong in the book, but they're certainly going to keep them in my file. But, you know, in some of the other things I've done as far as I've been president of the state of the defense lawyers here in New Mexico. I've got an award from them as distinguished service. And surprisingly enough, this year, you know, Joe Rail and his son established an award called the Rail Circle of Honor for New Mexico trial lawyers. They have a space at the Bar Center with the name and photographs of these lawyers that they pick. I think they pick 2 a year. But Jerry Rail called me up and wanted to know if they could put me on that list. And so I said, sure, as long as it doesn't cost me anything. So, and that's just another award I got. But to me, it's just another recognition.
Would you like to talk a little bit about some of the significant cases that you remember?
Yes, I'm thinking of cases that not only were kind of interesting, but also that might have made some law in New Mexico. Among the cases I've tried, and by the way, I've tried cases in almost every jurisdiction in New Mexico, and if you remember, you and I tried a nice one down in Roswell once. One of the cases I remembered, it's a matter of record. It's Bernadette Anaya versus St. Vincent Hospital in the blood bank of New Mexico. The reason I remember that is because it was the first HIV case in New Mexico that I'm aware of. And it was a blood bank, blood donor system situation with a concern that the young lady who gave birth had been subjected to blood transfusion that might have been HIV infected. I learned all about HIV. I'd never heard of the word before.
What year was that?
In the early 80s. And to my knowledge, it's the first HIV case in the state of New Mexico that related to that. I recall reading For Whom the Bell Tolls, which is a book about HIV and how it started and progressed, and one of the problems, some of the problems it created. But that to me was a sort of a milestone as far as HIV is concerned, a blood bank. And it also encouraged the blood bank system to be a little more strict as far as their treatment of the blood was concerned. I was also involved in the early 80s with the I-125 cases here. I represented St. Joseph's Hospital, that were the first type of radiation cases that I'm aware of in this area. It was a treatment of men with cancer, the cancer of the prostate, with I-125 seeds, and they utilized a computer in order to determine the number of rads as they say for the life of the seed, and there was apparently a malfunction in the type of computer, and if the results of the seed, after they determined the number of rads that was delivered, didn't reach a certain level, they would give external beams. And because of the error, the external beam they gave far exceeded what they should have been. And we had 18 men that were subjected to this that for different results. Some of them resulted in death. But I represented St. Joe's Hospital from doing all of those. As a matter of fact, it took up to about 3 years of my life. But it was a fascinating experience, and it was everybody was blaming everybody else, from the person who prepared the computer, to the hardware they bought, to the advice they were getting as far as the doctors that were the radiologists that were inserting these seeds, plus the urologists who were they were the doctor for the patients, and it was a very interesting matter as far as that was concerned. But it also got some national attention, unfortunately, because of the radiation that was involved. But it resulted in better techniques. It resulted in better treatment as far as any patients are concerned. As a matter of fact, I went back to Lowell Anderson back in New York for some experts. And as a result of my contact, I represented him in several cases here in New Mexico later on. But those cases are cases that I think were significant as far as treatment of patients are concerned, and also the development of techniques and a new type of instruments in delivering them. I had also an interesting case, and one of the reasons I remember this one is because of what happened during and after the case. It's styled Frank versus Dr. Zukal in St. Vincent's Hospital. I represented the hospital, and Rand Miller represented Dr. Zukal. He was a general practitioner, and this young lady gave birth to twins, and one of them did not live, so she filed a lawsuit against the doctor and the hospital. I represented the hospital, and as I said, Rand represented the physician. They hired a expert out of California to testify because they couldn't find anybody locally to do it, and they used one of the nurses from the University of New Mexico as one of their witnesses for the plaintiff. I want to tell you something about the case because to me it was significant. The nurse that testified was one of these very specific type of persons that if it wasn't written, it didn't happen, you know, and I could tell that she left the wrong impression on the jury. And when the plaintiff put the expert on, they put him on out of place because he was charging him $1,000 a day. And the plaintiff was on the stand, and they interrupted, took her off the stand, put the expert on. When the expert was finished, the plaintiff wisely didn't call his witness back on the stand because all she did was cried for 4 hours. Rand Miller got up to cross-examine her, and I called for a recess and told him, "Don't ask her a question, Rand." because they're primed for you. Since they've closed their case, as far as he's concerned, leave her alone. I sent my expert, my nurse home. She was outside as a witness. And I got up and said, Your Honor, we have no question to ask this. And you could have heard a pin drop in the courtroom. My closing argument, I told the jury, how'd you like to have this nurse take care of you? You were sick in the hospital. And the jury actually burst out in a laugh. And I said, Brian, we got him. You know. Sure enough, we got a defense verdict. But what was important, by the way, Carl Butkus was second chair in that case. But what I remember specifically about it is the doctor was so pleased that he took the whole jury out to the Palace bar and bought them a drink, which had never happened to me before. But in addition, the former of the jury got up and toasted the attorneys. And I told Carl Butkus, Carl, you better relish this because this isn't going to happen again during our lifetime. You know, that was just one of the cases I remembered. One of the other cases that I recall because of what was involved was Ogaz versus Alabama Freight Lines. It's a case that happened down in Lordsburg that I tried in Lordsburg. It was a truck pickup accident where two young men, the Ogaz brothers, were killed in the truck and in the pickup, and they found a case of beer in the pickup. And the question is to fault, you know, and in the mortuary they took blood from them and tested out the alcohol. Well, it was my duty to relate the amount of alcohol in the blood in the dead body, bring it back to the time that the accident happened. So I hired an toxicologist from the Veterans Association, from the Veterans Hospital, and flew him down to Lordsburg and put him on. And we were able to relate the amount of alcohol that was in the bloodstream at the time of the accident back. So to my knowledge, it's the first time I'd ever done it. And it was interesting trying to get it done. But it was a rather a fascinating case, and we finally settled it out for just to get rid of it. But what was also interesting about it is our principal witness was a postal truck driver from Mexico who supposedly spoke only Spanish. So we put him on the stand, and of course with a translator, interpreter, and it took us almost all day for his testimony. But when I discharged him, he gets up walks up to the judge and he says, "Judge, can I go home now?" in perfect English. But in addition to that, he walked down the jury box and shook hands with every one of the jurors. You know, I thought, well, I better make a note of this because it's never happened to me before. But that's one of the reasons I remember the case. Another case, Style Archer versus Roadrunner Trucking Company. The reason I remember that case is because it was a case where the wife sued for loss of consortium because of injuries her husband had sustained, and for which he received workman comp. And there's a court ruling that she was not entitled to loss of consortium because the injury had gone to it had been compensated under the Workman Comp Act, and that was exclusive, which is the matter of law in New Mexico too. Another case that to me was significant in medical malpractice was Goffey versus Pharmaceal and Dr. Burst in Presbyterian Hospital. I represented the doctor. This was a case where the Mr. Goffey, the patient, had a intestinal obstruction, and in order to relieve the obstruction, the doctor used mercury in a balloon, and he inserted it into the mouth, into the intestine, to relieve the obstruction. In pulling it out, the the balloon burst and he ingested the mercury. The people in the hospital attempted to relieve him of the mercury by putting him in a certain position on the operating table and pounding his back and all. He sustained a heart attack. So he sued the manufacturer, Pharmacia, he sued the doctor, sued the hospital. And the reason I remember it is because the plaintiff, who by the way was Jim Toulouse, had an expert from Washington testify as to the standard of care. I had Dr. Sims, Governor Sims's brother, who was a well-known doctor here, as my expert. At that time, the standard of care in New Mexico as far as medical malpractice was a strict locality rule, period. I contested the use of the out-of-state expert on the basis that that wasn't compliance with our strict locality rule. Judge Franchini agreed with me, but he says, I think it's wrong. Why should the standard of care of practice medicine be different in Albuquerque and elsewhere? But that's the Supreme Court ruling, and you're right. I hope somebody appeals this and to show whether I'm right or not. Sure enough, he granted my summary judgment, our motion to dismiss. It was appealed. The Supreme Court reversed. And now the standard of care is, whether you get an expert from New York, they're making differences. That's the way they practice medicine. And I think that's right. But up to then, it was a strict standard of care and locality rule. But to me, that changed the standard of care for the best. I've got some of these radiation cases are made some significant law because they dealt with fraudulent concealment as to the time that the statute of limitations ran from the date of occurrence or from the date of discovery or what, and the Supreme Court said from the date of discovery or could have discovered with reasonable diligence, which I think is the law now and probably appropriate too. I recall a case involving a Centennial Development Company, and that's reflected in some photographs in that binder, where Leroy Hansen and I went down to the bottom of this mine in Grants, about 1,500 feet down, which was an experience in itself. This young miner, or this young engineer, had been working there about 2 weeks. And went down at the bottom of this mine, supervising the building of the shaft. And in building the shaft, they would use tiles, wooden tiling, to block off the walls so that they wouldn't fall into the ground. And while they were doing this, he goes down to inspect it. He puts his head down underneath to look up and see if there was whether the rocks were intact. One of them slipped and fell and killed him. So they sued the developer, they sued the mine and all, and we represented the Centennial Development Company that was building. We tried it in Gallup. I had Joe Holland was assisting us in putting it together, and I had him build a shaft in front of the jury, show how it was done and the fact that what he had done, and I got a defense verdict, by the way. And one of the letters I've got in there is from development company saying, how great a lawyer I was and all. Of course, if I'd lost it, I probably wouldn't have gotten it. But nevertheless, I remember because of the type of case and the fact that Joe went down to the bottom of the shaft with us to take some photographs, but the water was just like a rainforest. And he ruined his camera. And we had to put on special gears to go down. And I can appreciate what my father had to put up with when he was a coal miner. In those days, they had mules hauling it out. It was hand pick and all. But because of the conditions down there, I remember telling Leroy, I don't know how much these miners are making an hour, but it's sure whatever it is not enough. And I remember the case because of the photographs and the fact that Leroy and I were together. The first plaintiff's case I ever tried was style Morrison versus Rhodey. It's in the reports. It's an accident between a truck and a bus near the Arizona state line in New Mexico. And Morrison was Gina's client, and I tried it for a plaintiff. But some of the things that happened during the trial, I got a plaintiff verdict in the early 50s for $60,000, which was a hell of a lot of money in those days. But the problem we had is that Mr. Morrison was quite a character, and unfortunately I found out liked to drink a little booze. He sells his interest in the lawsuit. But Rhodey was Ray was appointed as the guardian of the estate, and that's why he's the named party. But some of the things that happened, I don't want to put it on record, but we were late in getting started one morning, and the principal driver, his son was driving at the time of the accident because his father was sleeping. Well, the reason his father was sleeping is because I think he was drunk. But I had put them up in a motel here in town, and fortunately he wasn't the one who was driving at the time, but nevertheless he's the one that was charged with the operation of the truck. He didn't show up for trial one morning, so I sent the adjuster out to find out why. An hour later, he brought him into the courtroom, and during a break, he told me, he said, you know, I had to wake this guy up, but in addition, we had a problem. Did you know he had a glass eye? And I said, no, I didn't know he had a glass eye. He had an authority to drive. He had a permit to drive. But he said, not only that, but he dropped the damn thing, and it shattered, and we had to put it together. It's now sitting in his head, and he's on the stand, you know. Well, since he wasn't the driver, I figured, you know, I don't have the responsibility of informing the court all this stuff. Let them find out themselves, because his son was the driver at the time of the accident. But can you imagine my sitting there for a whole week with one of my clients sitting at the table with a glass eye patched up with glue in his head during a trial? Don't ever experience that. And I was a plaintiff, and I got $60,000. It was appealed. It was sustained in the Supreme Court, and in the meantime, Mr. Morrison had sold his interest for cash value. You know?
Would you like to, are there any other significant cases, or can we move on maybe to your...
Pardon?
Can we move to some other topics that, or are there other cases you want to discuss?
Well, just let me give you a list of them. A Hotel of Distinction, West Incorporated versus City of Albuquerque. That to me is a significant case because it involves the Hyatt Hotel. The city had an agreement with the Hyatt Hotel people to develop the hotel site as part of the convention center. The Hotel of Distinction, which is part of Hilton Hotel, filed a suit against the city, contending that the arrangement that they'd made violated the state constitution against donation. And the city hired me to defend them. Matter of fact, Jim Woodland and I handled it. And the time constraint for the agreement was almost over with. We had about 2 weeks' time, or it would have terminated. And they were in the process of building it. They dug the ground out, and that was over in 500 Marquette, if you remember. We had a hearing in our one of our conference room with this table one Saturday afternoon, because we needed to get a decision. Judge Deaton was the judge, and he ruled in our favor, and they appealed it the next Monday. Because of the time constraint, I had to go to the Supreme Court and try to get them to accelerate the decision. The decisions in the books, they upheld us, and so hadn't been for that, maybe the Hyatt Hotel wouldn't be there, because that's what they tried to stop. They didn't want any competition. There's another case, it's Red River Ski Area. I tried it in Taos. Leroy Hansen and I did. During the summertime, you know, they have the ski tow for
Tourists.
Trainer for visitor viewing. 2 young ladies from Oklahoma were going up, and this young man was coming down, and unfortunately he'd been drinking. He tried to, at one of the posts where they passed, he attempted to jump out of his car into their car and fell and broke his back. So he sued the ski people, and Leroy and I defended him in Santa Fe. And the reason I remember it is because during the trial, it lasted for 2 weeks. We went one Saturday. We were going to go to the jury Saturday afternoon. The judge let the jury go out to lunch. When they came back in, one of them was so drunk he couldn't sit in the jury box. So we had to postpone, and everybody agreed for the jury to come back on Sunday to deliberate. That's particularly what I remember. But some of the actions by the attorney handling that case, that was very significant in the case, but and we only got stuck for $20,000. So to us, it was a victory, but it was an interesting case. I had Joe Holland take the actual.
Joe Holland was an investigator, right?
Take the ski lift, put it in the jury room, put it take it in the courtroom with a crane, and it was so heavy it almost fell through the floor in the old courtroom in Taos. But there's several other cases that I thought might be of some interest, but they all relate to medical malpractice and making the statute of limitations, and whether or not wrongful death involved a viable fetus, whether the legislature intended that viable fetus being entitled to recover in a Wrongful Death Act. And the Supreme Court in that case said, yes, it did. The Salazar versus St. Vincent's Hospital. Those are just some of the cases that I've had, and I tried. Some of them more interesting than others. I remember the one you and I tried down in Roswell, where the guy wanted $2 million for a jury trial, remember, and we were successful. But
Richard, I think you could probably talk another several hours about cases that you've had that are interesting.
Let me, you had asked me about my feeling about the practice of law and how things have changed. You know, when I started practicing law, it was rather simple. There wasn't very much discovery. There wasn't, the deposition was not nearly as in detail they are now. The rules were very simple. I remember going trying cases with, 1 or 2 files, and that was it. And the reason I piled up so many jury cases is because if it lasted more than a week, that was an extremely long jury. But I've seen the law practice change so radically that to some extent I feel concerned as to where we're going. Let me just quote from a article that appeared in the Experience magazine I get from from the Bar Association. And he says, when our generation was admitted to the practice of law.
Who are you quoting?
I'm quoting the president of the magazine of the Experience, which is part of the American Bar Association.
Ah, okay.
And the president's name is Theodore A. Kolb, K-O-L-B. That really, I think, reflects my feeling too. When our generation was admitted to the practice of law, we joined what was then a respected legal profession, a profession that was dedicated to the resolution of disputes between members of our society or the guidance of society in their engagements so that disputes would be averted. Unfortunately, over the years, we are told that we are no longer a profession but a business. If that be the case, I think we're doing a very poor job because our product costs too much and takes too long to be delivered. Our legal press rates members of the bar not by the accomplishments of resolution or resolving complex problems, but rather on the amount of earnings they make. Tools such as discovery, which were created in order to assist in the resolution of disputes, have become a weapon rather than an aid in the resolution, which I certainly agree with. Disputes are settled not on the merits of either party's position, but on the cost of resolving a dispute. And at the bottom is a cartoon with a lawyer talking to a possible client saying, "You have a pretty good case, Mr. Pitkin. How much justice can you afford?" And unfortunately, I agree with the matter of rules. Every time you pick up a bar bulletin now, there's a rule change. You can't file paper anymore. You've got to have a special procedure in filing in court, obtaining copies. It's gotten to the point where we have to send our secretaries and paralegals to special courses almost every 2 or 3 months because something new comes up. Try to file something in federal court now. You can't file paper. You have to do it electronically. You have to know just exactly where to file it, how. Rules came out 2 weeks ago. In filing Court of Appeals, number of words on the page, number of pages, this sort of thing. The courts are getting to the point where they're doing these things to accommodate themselves, not accommodate the clients or the public, and they're making it more difficult for the lawyers. To me, all of these electronic gadgets, instead of making it more efficient, to me, they've made the world a little more complicated.
Well, I imagine a lot of people would agree with that.
Yeah.
Can you, Richard, can you tell us a little bit about your family and how your practice of law affected your family and you haven't mentioned your kids.
My family
you had
of
a couple
law,
of kids, I think.
Of lawyers?
Yeah.
Well,
Well, your family, your children.
Oh, my children. Well, fortunately, they both graduated the University of New Mexico. Paul is now a lawyer on his practicing by alone as a workman comp specialist. My daughter Gina is a graduate of the University of New Mexico. She has a master's degree and is a psychotherapist with the University of New Mexico Hospital. Paul has 2 sons. One wants to be a musician. The other one is he's an electronic engineer student in Cal Polytech, straight A, just made the dean's list. And what I'm proud of is I taught him how to play golf, and he's now a scratch golfer.
Good.
My wife Mary is in ill health. I have a health care taking care of her. But one of the reasons I've been able to do all these things is because my family's been very understanding. And I remember when I was first in law school, I had been out of high school, out of school for some years, and I had difficulty in reading because of my eye condition. My wife used to read to me so that I'd be able to go to school. Without putting up with me, so to speak, I don't think I would have been able to work as well as I did. Let me tell you about the time I ran for public office, may I?
Sure.
I was involved as a state treasurer for a governor candidate at one time, and I was told that I'm the only treasurer that ever handled a campaign that came out with a little money, extra money, because you got a accurate account. After that, people kept wanting me to get involved, but I didn't particularly care what I had gone through. They talked me into running for county commission. At that time, it was some time ago. John Sims, who was former governor, called me and he said, you know, we'll put you on the ticket. Can we run you for county commission? I said, sure. You know, I thought it was going to be a lot of fun. I attended 2 meetings. I spent $17. I didn't go to any more meetings, anything. But I told Gino, who wanted to finance me, I said, Gino, look, I can't go to these meetings because I can't lie to these people. I'm not going to make the Rio Grande River run back towards Santa Fe. That's what these people are, you know, that's what these people are offering. Every time they go to a meeting, they tell people out in the audience what they want to hear for their vote. I can't put up with that. Forget it. I darn near won and scared me to death. That was my last venture as being a politician. So now I look at everything these politicians say with a critical eye.
Yeah. Do you have any other interests or involvements outside the law, outside of your legal profession?
Well, let me tell you my view of some of the judiciary and some of our lawyers, if I may. I think they ought to have another rule maybe, that before you can be appointed to a judge, you have to have some experience as far as trials are concerned and actually court appearances. Some of these judges, I'm afraid, lack that kind of experience, and they're as novice as some of the lawyers that appear before them who neither of them know, and they have to learn just like now. To me, law school teaches you what the basic law is. They don't teach you how to be a lawyer, how to be lawyering. And that's, well, you've been through it. And you know that there's a distinction between graduate of law school and being a lawyer. And that's why Bob Curtis tells me, you know, doctors, when they go to medical school, that's why they have to put in an extra 3 years so they'll know how to get the experience to be able to do it. And I think maybe something like that ought to happen with lawyers too, because so many lawyers, and it doesn't work well for the client either because they're not getting that kind of service.
Indeed. What would you say what's your legacy to the legal profession? Do you feel like you have any particular thing you'd like to be remembered for?
I hope, Kathy, that others will certainly become interested in not only wanting to do things for the state bar. I did them because I wanted to. I did them because I enjoyed it. I did it because I thought it was part of being a lawyer. In addition, getting involved in community affairs. I try to talk to the lawyers that are in our firm now, saying, you know, please get involved in doing something for the bar, because if you don't, it's not going to progress, and it's not only best for the legal profession, but certainly for the public and for the clients and for the courts. If some of the things I've done, and I'm especially proud of what I've done for the Medical Review Commission and the Medical Society and the State Bar, and I respect. And by 45 years, I worked with the Cancer Society. I had a great deal of satisfaction doing that, because I think that is just as valuable as contributing to their fund. I just hope that lawyers get involved and do some of these things. They now say that, well, it's difficult for me because I'm so busy racking up hours for my salary. Well, I found time to do it. They can find time to do it. Of course, you have to have the help and understanding of your family, but it can be done. I know, because I did it. I just hope that other people do it too, especially some of our younger lawyers, and that they can add a lot to society and to the legal profession, and they'll do other things other than just practice law.
Yeah.
It enriches your life. It did mine.
Yeah.
And I would do it over again.
Well, that's a good note to conclude on.
Thank you.
Thank you.